that rather than a dead body, he preferred a live body. He preferred a totally compliant live body. And that meant a drugged body, and he preferred the body drugged. It was a diminution when life was taken. It wasn't as interesting. He liked to hear the heart. He liked the aliveness of the body, but the drug only lasted so long. Indeed, he told the police that he tried to extend it with ether. They found ether in the apartment. And he tried to keep them under when the drug, after a period of time, the drug would wear off. He couldn't artificially, didn't have intravenous apparatus to put the drug in. So as they tried to come out of it, he attempted to extend the drug period by the use of ether, but he was not successful in that attempt. And eventually, he heard one time on TV or radio that you could freeze. People were dry freezing their pets, and you could dry freeze a pet as though it were alive, and that he would prefer even that. First the live, very compliant person, such a person you do not find, then the drug-compliant person, finally the person dry freeze, if you will, and last the body, having the body, a dead body. That was the last choice, not the first choice. I'd like to talk to you about the law. May we turn that on? Like this. This is the law that you will be deciding, the judge will be instructing you. It's 971:15, mental responsibility of defendant. A person is not responsible for criminal conduct if at the time of such conduct, as a result of mental disease or defect, he lacks substantial capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. All right, there's no issue of defect here. Everyone agrees Mr. Dahmer is of at least average intelligence. We're not talking about a person who is a mental defective. That's not in this picture at all. So the issue is mental disease. And there will be discussion and debate, disagreement between the psychiatrists on this. There is what's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. They list what they call mental disorders, and paraphilias is one of those mental disorders. It's a new type of word. The old word used to be sex deviant. That was a word that some viewed as an insulting word because of the various categories that went under that. And the word paraphilia is a relatively new word. The deviation that would be involved here would be interest in a dead body, a sexual interest in a dead body. Well, the newer word for it is called a paraphilia. And the doctors for the defense and the doctors for the state will say, yes, he had a paraphilia. He did take pleasure out of a dead body, and that is referred to as a disorder within that manual. However, the doctor will say, Dr. Deese particularly will say, that mental disease is not, that you see in this statute, is not the type of mental disorder that they're talking about in that manual. And indeed, that manual on its face will tell you that you can't overlap the two. Merely because it's called a mental disorder in the manual itself warns you that that doesn't mean it's going to be a mental disease under the law. So there will be a discussion about that. You will hear testimony about that. And then you will hear testimony about whether he lacked substantial capacity to either appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. And these are some of the examples that you will see in terms of to appreciate it. When Dr. Dietz, and I'd like to take a minute or two to introduce Dr. Dietz in his absence. Dr. Dietz is educated at the Cornell Medical School, also took some Cornell undergraduate, took advanced medical education and advanced psychiatry and studied in that process at Johns Hopkins. He went to Harvard and taught at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, went to the University of Virginia, where he held an assistant professor position in both the Faculty of Law and the Faculty of Medicine. He was the key government psychiatrist in the Hinckley case. He has testified on other serial murder cases. He has written on serial murder cases, has lectured on serial murder cases, and will bring to bear that experience. I will also ask you to check his thoroughness. Watch the number of hours that he spends before he formulates his opinion. The doctors formulated their opinions and submitted them to the court prior to January 10, 1991. The court ordered it, as is proper under the statute, that those opinions be submitted. See the number of hours, the thoroughness with which the respective doctors, all of them. I invite you to measure my doctors against it, measure the defendant's doctors. How many hours did you spend with the defendant, interviewing him? Did you get all the facts? Did you discuss all the cases? How did you handle it? Did you work independently, and so on? I invite you to evaluate my experts. I urge you to evaluate. When we were doing the voir dire, I asked you to consider qualifications and thoroughness and experience. I invite you to do that. All right, Dr. Dietz, in talking with the defendant over a 3-day period that he talked with him, Dahmer told him that the time that he killed each of these 15 victims, he appreciated that it was wrong to kill the victim. He further told Dr. Dietz that the fact that Mr. Dahmer, in some instances, took steps to reduce the chances that he would be identified as the last person seen with the victim. We're talking about his knowing that it's wrong. He doesn't want to be seen because he knows that it's wrong. The fact that Mr. Dahmer in each instance committed the charged offense in a private setting, hidden from the view of others. You sometimes have heard of an irresistible impulse. There was a case in Michigan of a person, an angry man, rushing into a crowded bar and shooting someone else when he heard that this man had violated his wife, going right in front of a crowd and shooting somebody. Hidden, and Mr. Dahmer, all these cases, all these incidences were done out of view. The fact that Mr. Dahmer found it necessary to drink alcohol to overcome his inhibitions against killing the victims. He told the psychiatrist how he had to drink the alcohol to get down his inhibitions before he would go on killing. The fact that Mr. Dahmer feared being caught in the killing of a victim or in the presence of a drugged, comatose, or dead or dismembered victim. Didn't want to be caught there because he knew it was wrong, obviously. The fact that Mr. Dahmer took elaborate steps to destroy evidence of his crimes and to hold it, to get rid of the bodies, and to hold it secure against discovery by others, including his techniques for disposal of bodies. And for at one point he concealed the head in various cases and so on. How he secured his apartment, how he locked it, how he marked it that it was protected with an alarm, how he had an alarm, how he put in this dummy camera. All of it reflecting he knows what he's doing is wrong. If he thought it wasn't wrong, he wouldn't be doing that, obviously. And then he painted the skulls. At one point he painted the skulls because he was afraid someone would see them and think they were real. So we got some spray paint and painted them so that they would look artificial. You perhaps have yourself seen artificial skulls. In terms of whether he had the capacity to control himself, I think, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at this particular point, he lacked substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct. Mr. Boyle did not speak to that issue when he lectured to you, when he spoke to you. I have spoken to it. I have told you that Mr. Dahmer said often when he was asked, yes, he knew that it was what he was doing was wrong. He said it to the police, said it to our psychiatrists, and I do not know if you'll see any evidence to the contrary. All right, what about the capacity to control? Did I keep that free? That light? Would you turn it on as if that's possible? The battery press turned out. Let me speak to it. Apparently the light has burned out. The issue of control, and was he able to control himself? I've addressed on that a number of times, touching even with the first case, the jogger case, where he didn't have to go out ravenous through the park looking for someone to knock down. The jogger didn't appear, and that was it. And he didn't do anything. He said he was 15 or 16. He didn't do anything until the Hicks incident was 2 years later. 2 years later that he decided to act. In the Hicks incident. All through the military, and that he did not assault anyone. When he was at his grandmother's house, the period that he was on work release, that he didn't assault anyone. That he went down to the bathhouses and didn't assault anyone in the bathhouses in Chicago. Never broke into an apartment to assault anybody. No evidence that a man out of control breaks into an apartment and assaults and kills another man so they can have his dead body. No evidence that he grabbed anybody on the street and used force to pull him off the street. Always a carefully controlled environment where he picks a man that has no car, brings him back to his place where he operates, where he has the drugs ready, he's prepared the drugs, he's got an environment that's protected where he's not going to be discovered, and so forth. I'm going to touch upon some of the items that Dr. Dietz points out as evidences of the control that the defendant had in his professional opinion. The fact that Mr. Dahmer told Dr. Dietz that at the time he killed each of these 15 victims, he would have refrained from doing so had the victims agreed to remain with him voluntarily for a few weeks. If they had said no, Weinberger came up for 2 days. The man from Chicago, Weinberger, he didn't kill him the first day. He enjoyed him. The second day, when Weinberger starts, he's got to go back to Chicago, that's when he kills Weinberger. And what he told Dietz is, no, if they had stayed for a couple of weeks, I would not have killed them. He wanted them alive. He wanted the pleasure while they were alive. Second, the fact that Mr. Dahmer told Dr. Dietz that at the time he killed each of these 15 victims, he would have refrained from doing so had a witness entered the room. Under control, would not have proceeded if a witness. You can think of the Flowers case, where the grandmother discovers that there's a man in the house. That's it. That's the end of the plan for Flowers. He does not proceed to kill Flowers. Same with the juvenile, that struggled with him, that he hit with a mallet, that he struggled with. He let that man go when he came to his senses, let that man go too. The fact that third, the fact that Mr. Dahmer was able to suppress his sexual behavior other than occasional masturbation for prolonged periods of time in the military, at his mother's house, at the grandmother's house, and so on. The fact that Mr. Dahmer was able to satisfy his sexual desires with masturbation at all times. The fact that Mr. Dahmer did in fact satisfy himself exclusively with masturbation from about 1973 until the murder of Mr. Hicks in 1978. And from that time until the Chwolny incident. Indeed, until the incident after that, where he had whatever those desires were, he maintained them under control. The fact that Mr. Dahmer prepared himself for some of the murders by clearing spaces in his apartment for victim storage, by powdering the tablets in advance. In a number of the cases, he powdered the tablets before he went out to look for a victim, and have the tablets ready, so then he would be prepared to drug them, to proceed with them sexually as he wished. And by occasionally working himself up by watching movies that featured evil or particularly powerful characters. The fact that Mr. Dahmer generally limited the murders to the weekends when he would have had sufficient time to enjoy the sex with the drugged person and then afterwards with the dead body. The fact that Mr. Dahmer did not kill any of the men he was attracted to while in bars or on the street or at the mall or in the peep show booths. It was always controlled back to his house.
We now begin an odyssey, the results of which, in a short period of time, will result in a decision to be made by you and you alone as to whether or not Jeffrey Dahmer did, at the time he committed these horrific murders to which he has pled guilty, whether or not he was suffering from a mental disease, the result of which that he lacked substantial capacity to either appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of law. It is very difficult for an advocate not to be an advocate, not to argue, not to try and convince at all stages. I cannot attempt to convince you of anything now. The time for that to happen will come in what's called closing argument, when I will say in closing argument that as it relates to some, one, or all of these offenses, that I have proved to a reasonable certainty by the greater weight of the credible evidence that Mr. Dahmer was not responsible because of this mental disease and the legal definition of insanity as I've said it. Now, I know from having been with you folks for the last 3 days that we have a jury here that is fresh, that has no opinion and is going to listen to the evidence. But it's very difficult for you to understand what the rest of us understand because we've been working on this case for so many months. And we are here trying to tell you things for not any other reason than to hopefully make you understand as this is progressing down the road of evidence as to what is happening in this courtroom so you can say, good, I understand it. If I were to try to explain to you the game of football in order for you who have just come in from some place that never saw the game played, it might take me hours, if not weeks, for you to understand all the nuances. What I am doing here in a very, very brief period of time is trying to lay out for you what I say I have accepted to be my burden, and that is my burden. And I understand that. So in that regard, what I want to do is to tell you to completely disregard that long list of witnesses that I read to you. Because now that we're at this point in time, certain decisions had to be made by myself with the advice and counsel of the people who are assisting me as to how this case should proceed. And it really hasn't varied for a long period of time, but we had to name a lot of witnesses because at the last moment, if something became important and we hadn't put that witness's name down, we might be foreclosed. And that's why both Mr. McCann and I have done what we've done. And I would like to tell you how this case is going to proceed before I get into some of the other details. I anticipate, and I know that the judge is going to give you some general idea as to what Mr. Dahmer pled guilty to, the 15 counts. You see, there were 17 homicides, but 15 charged. The evidence is going to show that the first homicide took place in a place called Bath, Ohio in the year 1978. That the second homicide took place in Milwaukee, but because of the nature of the homicide, it was not a charged homicide, but it's going to be discussed. It's going to be discussed. Everything's going to be discussed, but that certainly is going to be discussed. The rest of the homicides that took place in Milwaukee County. You will be made known about every aspect of it. And the person that's going to speak to you about every aspect of it is Jeffrey Dahmer. But he is going to speak to you through the members of the Milwaukee Police Department, the first of whom I'm going to summon as my very first witness. And that is the detective and or detectives, depending upon how they want to split up the testimony, who are going to read a very, very, very long confession to you. And this confession is going to have details that will cause you to be uncomfortable, but I'm sure that you will listen to the words for the purposes that you must know all of this information. Because subsequent to this confession, Jeffrey Dahmer talked to a lot of other people. He talked to a whole bevy of psychiatrists and psychologists and others. And the reason he did that was because every citizen in this country has an absolute right to have it investigated as to whether or not when they did any act, that they were of sound mind. On the night of Mr. Dahmer's arrest, a man by the name of Tracy Edwards was present with Mr. Dahmer. The evidence is going to show that he was about to be the next victim. Through fate, he did not become a victim, and the saga of Mr. Dahmer ended at that time, and in fact began at that time. It was subsequent to his arrest, very shortly thereafter, as the police will tell you, as Detective Murphy or Detective Kennedy will tell you, that Mr. Dahmer confessed to all, to everything. As best he could, under the constraints that he was placed in, he gave a full and complete statement to the Milwaukee Police Department, to the officers from Bath, Ohio, to the officers from the West Allis Police Department, because in fact, acts took place in West Allis, and one act took place in Bath, Ohio. And you're going to hear every bit of that. And I want to say unequivocally a number of things that I think the evidence is going to show. This was not racial. The evidence is going to show, after you hear the testimony of Mr. Dahmer as told to the Milwaukee Police Department, and as told to the doctors, Dr. Becker, Dr. Wallstrom, and Dr. Berlin, that Mr. Dahmer's obsession was to body form, not color. It is also a fact, as you know, that there was a lot of homosexual tendencies here, and the obsessiveness of Mr. Dahmer was clearly in the vein of fulfilling his sexual desires, which happened to be of a homosexual nature. This is not a case about homosexuality. That even as an early teenager, he started becoming interested in bones of dead animals. He would take them home, he would bleach them, he would study them. None of this was discovered by any members of his family. None of the interests that he had were known to his family. The doctors are going to testify that basically his early years were unremarkable, no greatly different than most, but a few things different, that they will tell you what you might consider the importance of that to be. It was when he was 14 years of age, as he has told the parties, and I'm confident at this juncture when Detective Murphy and Detective Kennedy testify, you will get some understanding and you will be able to judge the credibility of Jeffrey Dahmer in his dealings with all the parties concerned. But it was when he was about 14 years of age, he first came up with the idea of using a corpse for sexual purposes. He fantasized either having a corpse or a mannequin to use, and it was at that time that he had his first actual consensual homosexual encounter with a peer. He discovered his homosexuality and accepted it. He will tell you through the doctors he didn't understand it, but it caused him no concern other than the fact that he realized what he was. It was while he was in high school that this fantasy of his, doing things with dead things, started showing up when in a biology class he dissected a baby pig and took the head home with him, took the skin off and kept the skull. Three doctors are going to come into this courtroom and they're going to tell you that their opinion is that Jeffrey Dahmer suffers from a mental disorder, and it is called paraphilia. Without my trying to be a doctor and defining it for you, except generally, paraphilia is an arousal of a sexual nature to an inanimate object, a body part, or a process. And this paraphilia, there's all kinds of paraphilias. The doctors are going to tell you about the different kinds of paraphilias. But the paraphilia that best exemplifies the paraphilia that Jeffrey Dahmer had, which they will claim is, in their opinion, a mental disorder, which they will state in Jeffrey Dahmer was a mental disease. Their paraphilia that they found was necrophilia. And necrophilia is a disorder of the mind where there is a desire to have sexual contact with dead bodies. That's what they're going to say Jeffrey Dahmer was. He was a lot more than that, but that's the mainstay of his condition, was this desire for dead bodies, to have sex with dead bodies. Armed with that information, here now, I'm going to continue on in the chronology of Jeffrey Dahmer's life so that you may understand how that embryo of that may fit, as the doctors will testify. There came a time in 1975 or 76 that Jeffrey Dahmer's obsession with this sexual desire and fantasy and obsession got to the point where he saw a man who lived somewhere in the general area where he lived, running, jogging every day. He would see him jogging down the road, and he became so attached to the concept of having sex with this man that he went home and he sawed off a baseball bat so that he could get on his bike and ride past the man and hit him in the head with the baseball bat and knock him out, so as to take him up into the woods and have sex with him. That's what his quest was. And he put that quest into play and got on that bicycle and went out to find this man. And thanks be to God, the man had never jogged that way again. So it didn't happen. But the doctors are going to tell you what that meant in the grand scheme of things as it is to the mind of Jeffrey Dahmer. Beginning when he was about 16 years of age, and this would be in the years of 76, 77, he started collecting animals, always dead animals. And there's going to be testimony as to why that's significant. Never killed a live animal, but would go on the roads and find roadkill, dogs, other type of animals that have been struck by cars that were laying there. And he would take them home, and he started having a fascination of wanting to see what they looked like inside. And he would open them up. One time, he took off the head of a dog and put it on a stake and hung it out so that everybody could see it, primarily for shock value. This obsession of this dead animals and doing things with them started becoming something that became more and more into his life, into his head. Detective Kennedy, what were the circumstances under which you became aware of Mr. Dahmer, and would you tell the court and the jury how that came about, please?
I was working on a homicide squad on the late shift. My partner, Michael Dubas, and myself were sent to Mr. Dahmer's apartment to investigate a head which was found in the refrigerator.
And that apartment was located at 924 North 25th Street in the city and county of Milwaukee?
That's correct, sir.
What apartment was Mr. Dahmer's apartment? What was the number?
Number 213.
Did you have occasion at that time to make some observations concerning that apartment?
Yes, sir, I did.
But since I've already informed everyone here that we're going to only talk about the statement, we'll limit that aspect of your testimony then, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Did you start talking to Mr. Dahmer about anything?
While I was in the apartment, sir?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Did you have occasion to transport him from the apartment?
Yes, sir, I did.
And who did you transport him with?
In a Milwaukee police van, which is used to convey prisoners, Squad 93, police officer Alan Cheslow, and myself.
So you started taking him down where? Downtown?
That's correct, sir.
And he was in custody.
Yes, sir, he was.
You advised him of his constitutional rights.
Yes, sir, I did.
You told him about all of his rights.
Yes, sir.
Did you ask him if he wanted to make a statement?
Yes, sir, I did.
And did he make such a statement to you?
Yes, sir.
All right. You also advised him that he that he had a right not to have an attorney if he wished.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Tell us what you said to Mr. Dahmer and what he said to you during the time that you were present with him, where Detective Murphy was not. Okay.
Yes, sir. Would you
Let
like
me read from the exhibit if you wish.
Okay, sir. He admitted that he had been arrested in the past and states he is currently on probation for taking Polaroid pictures of a minor. Subject states that when he was 18 years of age and living in Richfield, Ohio, he picked up a hitchhiker whom he described as a white male about 19 years of age. He states he took him home and had homosexual sex with him, and states they were drinking beer and became intoxicated. He states they got into a physical fight because the 19-year-old individual tried to leave, and that during the fight, he states he struck the hitchhiker with the barbell. He states that the blow of the barbell caused the death of the hitchhiker. And at this time, he took the body out into a wooded area by his house and left it there to decompose for about 2 weeks.
Let me stop there. Did you know that there had been such a murder or a homicide that had taken place when he was 18 years of age at the time that you were talking to him?
No, sir, I did not.
So he volunteered at the commission of a murder.
That's correct, sir.
Is that the first murder that he told you about?
Yes, sir, it is.
And you didn't have him on any other murder charges at that time, did you?
I realized that there was a head in the refrigerator.
I understand that, but
No,
you didn't
sir, I
have a
didn't.
murder. You didn't say you're under arrest for the murder of.
No, sir.
Okay, go ahead, continue after.